of focus on Horn of Africa, we have Dr. David Sheen. We will discuss the U.S. policy toward the Horn of Africa, highlighting perspective from the ambassador, who is a seasoned diplomat and also professor. I mean, used to be professor and former U.S. Foreign Service officer with extensive experience in the region. In Dr. Dr. In Ambassador David Sheen has 37 years of U.S. Foreign Service experience. He used to lecture in Georgetown University, although he's retired now.
George Washington
George
University.
Washington, yes, sorry. Sheen has held multiple key diplomatic positions in the region. He used to be ambassador of Ethiopia, for the U.S. He has authored works on China-Africa relation, publishing in 2012. Also, public, welcome, and free highlights in the events. We will talk about that. So, again, welcome to our program. And also, we will, impact, the implication of U.S. involvement in the Horn of Africa affairs, particularly in the context of geopolitical dynamics. So, what is your views or thoughts in the complex interplay of internal, conflicts, regional power struggles, and the influence of global actors that is shaping the regime security and political landscape in the Horn of Africa?
Of course, that's a really big question. I think we need to break it down a bit in order to look at the various parts of it. But I would say, in a very general sense, that your principal external actors in the region, and especially in Somalia and Somaliland, are the combination of the United States, the European Union, to some extent China, Turkey very much so, and Somalia. Of course, the African Union and the United Nations also continue to be much engaged. It's become a very complex stew of actors at this point, and the Gulf states have entered it too in a major way, although their engagement seems to be constantly shifting, and it's very difficult to follow what the Gulf states are doing in any given period of time, especially in a place like Somalia and Somaliland. But the combination of actors, most of whom are not acting in concert with one another, they're acting as individuals, makes it somewhat difficult to come up with a sort of overall picture as to what the outsiders are doing. So I might just start with the United States and particularly what they're up to in Somalia and Somaliland, and then perhaps a little more broadly in the Horn of Africa generally. But I want to be very precise on how the United States sees the Somaliland situation, and I refer to a May of 2026 statement that the State Department sent to Congress, in which it stated, and I'm quoting, "The United States recognizes the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Federal Republic of Somalia, which includes the region of Somaliland." But that same statement goes on to point out that the United States is trying to improve its engagement with Somaliland, notes that the U.S. Africa Command has regular engagements with Somaliland authorities and is exploring areas for potential cooperation. In addition, it notes that Somaliland's ports represent potential alternatives to other congested regional facilities. There's a more recent statement, and perhaps a more important one even, on the question of Somali sovereignty, that was given in an interview that General Dagvin Anderson,
Yes.
the U.S. commander of the Africa Command, gave in an interview to Omar Farouk Osman, the Secretary
Exactly.
General of the National Union of Somali Journalists.
Hmm.
It was published on July 31 of this year, so it's very, very recent. And in that interview, most of which focused on U.S. Security cooperation with Somalia, but
Hmm.
down towards the end of the interview, General Anderson said, U.S. policy is and remains the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Federal Republic of Somalia. That has not changed. And in response to a question, he said that there are no plans to build a base in Somaliland. Uh, to some extent, one has to factor in, however, some of the interests in Congress, particularly with Senator Ted Cruz, who is
Hmm.
pushing very hard for recognition of Somaliland. And there are some others in Capitol Hill who have that point of view. So it's a little hard to know what is going on between the executive branch in Washington and the legislative branch in terms of the future. For the moment, those statements that I just read, I think, reflect the U.S. position on Somalia and Somaliland.
Hmm.
But who knows? This could all change in the future as the situation changes on Capitol Hill. If you look at U.S. policy more generally in the Horn of Africa, I think it's fairly clear that the U.S. is trying to improve its relationship with Ethiopia. It's always been an important relationship, a strong relationship, but it's had some bumps in the road from time to
Hmm.
time, even dating back to my time in Ethiopia, and those bumps continue to occur. Uh, but the current effort seems to be to improve the relationship, to not harass Ethiopia on human rights and democratization issues, to sort of leave that aside, to focus more on economic issues. The U.S., for example, is now looking to compete with China in constructing or having some role in construction of the new international airport outside of Addis Ababa, which is a major infrastructure project. Uh, U.S. is also following closely developments in Sudan, although I think it's as frustrated as everyone else is in that that war is just not coming to an end, and all U.S. efforts to mediate the issue have so far not met with any success. And I have the sense that the U.S. is backing away somewhat from Sudan because it sort of, in a sense, has given up on an effort to solve the problem there.
Hmm.
I'm sure it will step in whenever it sees an opening to try to get that effort back on track, but for the moment it's just going nowhere. My own view is that until such time as the paramilitary rapid support forces and the Sudan armed forces agree that it is in their interest to bring that to an end, to bring that conflict to an end, it's just not going to happen. They're both committed to fighting, and that's what's going on. There have been some initial feelers by Washington to reach out to Eritrea. There was a meeting in Cairo between the Eritrean foreign minister and Mossad Boulos, the Trump administration's special envoy for Africa and the Middle East. I don't know what came of those. I haven't seen much follow up from it, but it does indicate an effort to try to somewhat improve a relationship with Eritrea, which has been quite bad for many, many years. And
Hmm.
of course, the U.S. relationship with Djibouti continues to be strong and important. The U.S. has a major military facility there. It relies very heavily on that facility, and that relationship seems to continue to be quite strong.
Hmm.
Uh, in the meantime, you have the Iran war going on. You have the impact of the Iran war on what is going on, what is happening in the Red Sea, the reinvolvement of the Houthis, blockading Saudi vessels going through Bab el Mandeb. And although the U.S. has not become actively involved in that issue, I'm sure it's watching it very closely and is very concerned about it. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops as we move forward. That's sort of an overview of my understanding of the U.S. position in the region. Happy to take any deeper questions that you might have on it before
Okay.
getting into other countries.
Yeah, I just want to go back a little bit about Somalia. As you know, the international community and the US especially, they were helping, one in the security, security parameter there, and the second one was state building. But given the situation in Somalia right now, in the last 2 decades, there wasn't any, emerging, especially handling, the security, the Al-Shabaab, as you know, the terrorists, the piracy, is just getting worse. And then the second one is the state building. They still in the failed state. Even the last 2 weeks, the second largest, Puntland, they have had skirmish and the fighting within even Puntland. So, and he's still the current president is claiming that he has to, follow one man, one vote. But they still, there is a lot of misunderstanding. My question is the US, it seems, and the Western, particularly the Europeans, are hand off from Somalia, these days. What's the reason, what will happen? The scenario will come up in case they just, as they are talking right now, even as you mentioned, that military, Kevin, the general, he was saying, it is on condition that from now on we are helping. And he went, I mean, not him, but the other one of the general, he went to Somaliland after he visited, and then he visited also Puntland. At the end, he went also even Jubaland. What are these, U.S. policy, keep shifting with your
Well,
perspective, if you shed light on it?
I think you're right in pointing out that there's I think increasing ambiguity in terms of what the U.S. is trying to achieve in Somalia. I think it's frankly it's gotten somewhat discouraged with the whole state building effort, and it sees increasingly that this is really up to the Somali federal government to accomplish that, and that there's not a great deal that outside powers can do to improve the state building effort in the country. And you're quite right in pointing out in the recent contact with Puntland and Jubaland authorities, also increasing contact between our charge d'affaires in Mogadishu and the Somaliland authorities. So there's an effort to, on the one hand, underscore, as I indicated earlier, support for the sovereignty of the Somali federal government, but at the same time to be sure that there is contact with these other authorities that sometimes take a contrary position to what Mogadishu wants to accomplish. And that probably does send some mixed signals to everyone involved in both Somalia and Somaliland. So it is a little confusing at this point. I don't have any inside information on
Mhm.
what the U.S. is trying to accomplish with this, but I do sense that there is a certain discouragement that is setting in. At the same time, I think the security cooperation will continue, and the U.S. Military has been particularly helpful this year in trying to combat the Islamic State activity in Puntland and in the northern part of Somalia. I think they probably have been more active there than they have been in combating Al Shabaab in the southern part of Somalia. So it's the picture's a little bit confusing at the moment.
What is your thought on the, recognition of Israel? When we look at the geopolitical, equation in the Horn of Africa, it seems Somaliland has been waiting for this kind of, validation of its, quest, to be recognized because they were stable. I mean, the stability is high there. They also held, several elections. There was also, I mean, peace. So what do you think, like one of the member of the UN, recognizing Somaliland? Do you think, although, they were saying like this might open a Pandora box, but on the contrary, if you look South Sudan, if you look to Eritrea, they were, also, given, their independence, So it seems there was a euphoric, from Somaliland coming. And from that time on, even yesterday, the president of Somaliland, he met a second time with the donors, with the US in Nairobi, and then he was discussing. And it seems some kind of momentum is going on for Somaliland. And always, they used to, hold Somaliland for saying, for a failed state, that, it cannot even, as you know, Max Weber will say, if you, you are given a monopolize, violence, and but the other point always, the politician in the South, they say there is a violation of the sovereignty. But what do you think? And so Somaliland historically used to be different, and he was colonized by British and all that.
Well, both Somaliland and Israel had their own reasons for recognizing each other, and the reasons I think are different and interesting at the same time. Somaliland, of course, was looking for any country to recognize it, full recognition. It has some liaison offices in Hargeisa from a number of nations, but they don't officially recognize Somaliland as an independent country. Uh, Taiwan has sort of a special relationship with Somaliland, but even Taiwan and Somaliland do not officially recognize each other. So Israel is the first to do so. Now, there
Yes.
were some who were prognosticating that there would be a series of additional countries, perhaps the United States or Ethiopia or others who would follow the Israeli lead. That has not happened. And I don't see that happening anytime in the immediate future. So right now, it really is an Israel-Somaliland relationship. Now, Israel's reason for recognizing Somaliland were very much focused on security, Israeli security. Israel is deeply concerned about the Red Sea. It's concerned about the Houthis and neighboring Yemen. It wants to have a much better understanding of what is happening, not only in the Horn of Africa, but across the Red Sea, particularly in Yemen. It sees Somaliland as a base, as it were, to operate from, to obtain better intelligence on what's going on in the region. You see occasional stories about Israel is planning to establish some kind of a military base in Berbera. That has not happened, and I'm doubtful that it will happen. On the other hand, you might very well, in the days ahead, see Israeli military ships in and out of Berbera. You might very well see Israeli planes in and out of the airport at Berbera. The Israelis are very concerned about Iran. Iran, of course, uses the Gulf of Aden to smuggle weapons into the Houthis in Yemen. The Israelis want to have a better handle on all of this. So the Israelis, I'm sure, see this as a real victory for their ability to better monitor what is going on in the region. And as I said, the Somaliland authorities see it as the first step in trying to get additional countries to recognize them. So it's they saw it as in the interest of each other to do this, but so far it has not resulted in anyone else following along.
Yeah, coming to the picture is the question of Egypt. Egypt seems the best ally of US for so long. And these days, from all the pieces of articles that we are reading, they are saying that they're trying to shift that. And with respect of the what's going on in Iran war and also in the Bab el-Mandeb area and all that maritime. What do you think this would be a long, standing of U.S. policy toward Horn of Africa, particularly, when you look at it, in the 90 before 1990, it used to be the determinant factor was the Cold War. At that time, how they were shifting the US and Russia, the Soviet Union, but that one we move. And then during the Clinton time administration, they used to say, here we have a new democratic leaders like Malala Zenawi, and also, in the Rwandas, and then Museveni. That one also, we are over. Now we have a new, because the international order is not there anymore. We will talk also about the role of the institution like the UN. Let me just come back. So what is it seems like the US policy is lagging, comparing to China that is really hegemonic, not only in economic, but expanding in the Horn of Africa and in Africa in general.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and you're quite right in bringing China into it at this juncture. But let's take the Egyptian-U.S. relationship first. It's a long relationship. It's an important one. The United States and Russia have been the primary suppliers of military equipment to Egypt for over many, many years now. But this is starting to change because China is stepping into that spot in a significant way. And there have been a number of deals in the last year or two between China and Egypt in providing weaponry. So China is making it, and they're also engaged in the space sector, not to mention the infrastructure sector, where they've been very much involved for more than a decade. So China's playing a big role in Egypt these days, and I think it is starting to put Egypt in the position of being able to look to more than one partner in the future. So if I were in the United States government at this point, and I'm not, I would be a little concerned about where Egypt is going with all of this. But if you look more narrowly at Egypt's engagement in the Horn of Africa, it really is focused on one overwhelming issue, and that's Nile waters. Everything that Egypt does in the Horn of Africa is focused in one way or another on, does this impact negatively or positively on its continuing access to its water quota from the Nile, which basically means countering Ethiopia. So you have this sort of ongoing tension, a long-lasting tension between Egypt and Ethiopia, and as a result, you see Egypt improving relations with Somalia, which it sees as a potential ally against Ethiopia, improving relations with Eritrea, which it sees as a possible ally against Ethiopia, and trying to engage more in Red Sea activities. It wants to keep Ethiopia out of the Red Sea, does not want it to have maritime access. It certainly does not want it to have a military base in a place like Berbera or anywhere else on the Red Sea coast. So Egypt is taking, in my view, a fairly narrow approach to how it deals with the countries in the Horn of Africa. And if it sees that its relationship is in the interest of preserving its Nile waters connection, it will do so. Otherwise, its approach is, I'm not sure, as carefully calibrated as it might be.
Mm-hmm. But when you look at it recently, as you also, in the introduction, you put it, the U.S. Senior uh, Special Envoy of Middle East and Africa, he went and he met with the foreign ministers of Eritrea and, Somalia and in Cairo, So, but still after then, published an article that he was saying that he's not anti-Ethiopia. But as you know, the coalition and the alliance, the shifting in the Horn of Africa, what's going on in terms of geopolitics, is these days it's very high. The tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia, the tension that Somalia in Egypt doesn't want nobody will come on the Red Sea area. given all that factors together, I mean, if we take it together, what's your how can you elaborate that? And as a person who is a seasoned and who knows that area, what's the geopolitical ramification in the long run for the US, especially its policy?
Well, the United States has always seen Ethiopia as probably the single most important player in the Horn of Africa. Now, I don't consider Egypt to be in the Horn of Africa. That's a different geographical part of the
Yes.
world.
Mhm.
If you had to compare the U.S. Position or U.S. View of Ethiopia and Egypt, it might very well consider Egypt more important than
Mm.
Ethiopia. But within the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia has been the key player, and I don't see any administration changing its view on that. And I think that is why you have this current effort to try to strengthen the U.S. relationship with Ethiopia, particularly at the economic level. Um, and I think that will continue. I just don't see that changing. Ethiopia is just too important for the United States to take a negative position on, even when Ethiopia does things that the U.S. does not like. And that certainly was the case, or has been the case, over the last 30 years from time to time. If there were to be an outbreak of conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the U.S. would be very much opposed to that. It would like to ensure that there not be conflict involving Ethiopia. The current Sudan-Ethiopia relationship is worrisome, and I don't know what the U.S. is saying to Ethiopia about that, but I'm sure it has concerns about it and hopes very much that there not be conflict breaking out between Sudan and Ethiopia. We've had a dust up in Western Tigray as
Mhm.
of on August 1 of this year, where Tigray TPLF forces were interacting with Ethiopian National Defense Forces. It didn't last very long, but it's the kind of thing that could get out of hand very quickly. And the
Mhm.
U.S. would be very opposed to that kind of thing happening. So the U.S. is going to be focused on trying to ensure that there not be conflict, that there be political stability, uh, but it's not always in a strong position to ensure that that is the case.
Mhm. So when you look at it, the current administration of Trump, their leadership, the motto is, transactional leadership, how they, level it. What do you think, like when they dealing with Africa or any other country, there are two elements I would like to that you shed light on it. One is the U.S. aid and humanitarian, that the U.S. is well known for this, comparing to Russia, to China, to every other country, even like a person like me who were, when we fled from our country, the only country that I mean the main one that welcomed us was the US, and we get all kind of, in terms of education, it's business. I live in Minnesota here, how the Somali are really really doing well, although there was but what do you think with this under the new administration? If I just come back to those 2 points, the US aid, humanitarian, and also, because this US is a land of immigrants, there is always some kind of contrasting, view, that signal that is coming from administration.
Yeah, I think the Trump administration has made some serious errors when it comes to the way in which it is dealing with not only Africa generally, but Somalia particularly. We all know the comments that our president has made specifically about Somalis. Those are really regrettable. I don't know what he thinks he's accomplishing by doing that. But when you talk that way about another nationality, all you're doing is making a lot of enemies, and it just serves no useful purpose at all. And if you look at the continent more broadly, putting aside just Somalis, the the way in which the administration has dealt with the continent, I think, is unfortunate. The dismantlement of USAID was, in my view, a huge mistake. Now, can you improve USAID? Sure. Can you change some of the programs, even cancel some of the programs? Yes, absolutely. Every administration has the right to do that. But to come in and to abolish the whole USAID organization is just tragic. Now, American aid still continues in much of Africa. It's at a reduced level, and it's handled primarily by the State Department now, which is not really staffed up to handle it. We don't have aid offices around the continent like we used to, so you simply have embassy personnel who don't understand these programs very well trying to manage them, and I think that's a problem. And you also have these issues like putting restrictions on visas for Africans to come to the United States, shutting down visa offices, setting up regional hubs for getting a visa, so that many of our embassies, 25 of our embassies in Africa, can no longer issue visas to Africans. You have to go to another country to get a visa. I mean, this is silly. This does not save money. It does not improve national security, and it's, again, in my view, a mistake. And I think it may be the kind of policy that might be reversed in a subsequent administration, but for the time being, it is American policy, and I think it sends the wrong signal. There's an enormous focus on access to critical minerals in Africa, so those countries that have critical minerals are sort of uh, in a privileged position in terms of a relationship with the U.S. But if you don't have critical minerals, then there is much less interest in the country. So that too, I think, is somewhat of a misguided policy. There has to be an interest in the entire continent, not just those that have critical minerals.
Yeah, if I ask you, I mean, I have only a few questions left. When you look at it, IGAT, and when you look at it, African Union, and even when you look at it, the United Nations, it seems these days they are not what they promising and what they delivering is completely, diametrical opposite. Especially, particularly, the AU when it comes to instead of addressing the question of Somaliland or Somalia, they still one of the scholar he was arguing that these organizations are just fulfilling the state, I mean the leaders, interest, but not the people on the ground. What's your view on that? It seems like the institutions are very weak to address properly what the Africans need in terms of conflict management, negotiation, national dialogue, those kind of components.
I'm sorry, you're referring to the European Union
Yeah,
particularly, or
European Union or African Union or IGAT or United Nations, all these international institutions.
I guess I would have thought that the European Union is more engaged than you are suggesting.
Mhm,
Perhaps I'm wrong on that. I don't follow real carefully what the
mhm,
European Union is doing, but my impression is that the EU is still quite active, and including in the Horn of Africa. I think I think you're correct in that both the African Union and the United Nations, well, the United Nations is active in terms of the humanitarian side. There, for
mhm,
example, UNHCR on the refugee side is very much engaged, and the World Health Organization tries to be engaged where it can in areas that are in conflict in the Horn of Africa or Africa generally. Um, the World Food Program is very much engaged. So I would say that some components of the UN are engaged. The African Union has been a bit disappointing. I don't see that they have done that much. And
mhm.
EGAD, of course, is all entangled because of its membership. I mean,
Exactly.
when you have members who are sort of
Mhm.
fighting against each other, you're never going to have an organization that can be effective in resolving problems. So the IGAD situation is a very different kind of a problem.
Mhm.
But I think you have to look at each of these organizations individually, and I think some are doing better than others.
Mhm. And the last question, I mean, the last two question is when you look, the Horn of Africa, state member, let us say Eritrea, how it deals with the democracy, with its own, institutions. When it comes Djibouti, Ethiopia, in Somalia is failed state, and Somaliland is emerging, democracy. They didn't get yet a lot of recognition. So overall, what do you think? What will be the best, I mean, doctrine or some kind of, solving the problem, particularly the conflict there, so that the people will get a peace of mind and then, move toward a developmental state kind of, paradigm.
Well, I would like to see all of these external organizations and countries that we've talked about
Mhm.
spend more time trying to encourage democracy in all of the countries of the Horn of Africa. They all have issues, in my view, concerning democracy. Somaliland is probably at the top of the list in terms of being a relatively democratic country. But even Somaliland has its issues with freedom
Yes.
of the press, for example. But the others have even greater problems. And
Mhm.
I don't see any outside country or organization, including the United States, making much of an effort to encourage democratization in the Horn of Africa these days, and I think that's unfortunate. Uh, the U.S. in the past has tried to do so, not with a great deal of success. In the final analysis, it's up to the people and the governments of all of these countries
Mhm.
to decide that they want to be more democratic, and most of them have chosen not to do that.
What do you think about like a Turkey, like United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all these Gulf that becoming like a middle, power that are competing in the Horn of Africa? If you look at it, for example, what's going on in Sudan, more than half of the population are right now displaced. There is a man-made famine there. In Somalia, we know they were always supporting. Qatar was supporting. Even Turkey was coming, very aggressively there. So it's not only the U.S. and China, Russia, competition that we used to have, but right now this middle, what we call it, power, are also exacerbating, the situation on the ground. What do you think? What's your view on that?
Well, you're quite right. A lot of these middle powers are exacerbating the problem, particularly in a country like Sudan, where they are literally the facilitators of the conflict. And if the outside powers would end their support for the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudan Armed Forces, I think you could bring that conflict to an end a lot faster. And some of them are doing the same thing in other parts of the Horn of Africa. I think their engagement has generally been helpful when it comes to foreign investment, where they have put money into some projects that are useful not only to them but to the people who live in the Horn of Africa. Although even there you have to be a little careful in that uh, the Gulf states, particularly the UAE and Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, have put money into agricultural projects where they're growing food for their own consumption, not for the consumption of people living in the Horn of Africa. And then you get into the problem of how much is that benefiting the Horn of Africa. So there are some problems even on the investment side. But generally speaking, if they would put their money into more investment and stay further and further away from the political side of things, I think everybody would be better off for it. Uh, the Iran war may actually force them to sort of pull back somewhat. I think you're going to see the Gulf countries uh, focus more on internal problems in the Gulf as a result of the Iran war, and you may see that they're less involved in getting engaged in political issues in the Horn of Africa.
What will be your last, whether, there is a lot of diaspora here, Ethiopians, Somalis. Sudanese and others, and they can also play in terms of civic society. They can play a major role. We are here in a better position that to have some kind of positive impact to what's going on the ground. And overall, what do you think? What's the way out of this kind of crisis? Instead of, for me, only just painting this gloomy picture, what do you think in the long run that will help, particularly Horn of Africa, to emerge from this situation?
Well, the one thing that the diaspora has already done, which is positive, and it can do much more of it, and that is to reinvest in the countries from which they come. Certainly, Somalilanders have done that. A lot of what has happened in Somaliland has been at the hands of the diaspora in Europe and the United States, Canada. The same is true to some extent for Somalis out of the Federal Republic of Somalia, maybe a little less so in terms of overall impact than is the case for Somaliland. It certainly is true in the case of Ethiopians. A lot of the Ethiopian diaspora has given back to Ethiopia. Many have actually gone back to Ethiopia, invested on the ground. There are various organizations that give back to Ethiopia. Uh, so you do have that positive impact, and I think that can be increased. On the political side, it's much harder. If you have, for example, a Somali diaspora in the United States that is not in agreement on policy, which it is not, and the same is true for the Ethiopian diaspora, you don't have much impact because the American political system gets confused. It doesn't know who to believe or what side is the one to accept. So the different arguing components sort of rule each other out, and as a result, do not have much impact.
Mhm. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. David. Unless you have any other, words to say, we conclude our interview today in here.
Thank you, Gorse. Always happy to join you.
Thank you, and have a good day, sir.
You too.